Hey everybody, welcome back to the Sheepdog Project. Doc with you today. Want to talk about some things we got coming up from Sheepdog Response. We are going to have a team in Hoffman, North Carolina, September 21st through the 23rd for a Sheepdog Level 1 and an Occupational Level 1 class. If you are anywhere in the Carolina area, make sure you go check out that amazing training. We're going to be in Palm Bay, Florida. This was previously not a private course, but it was kind of a semi-closed course. It's now open to the general public. We're having a SOTEC Level 1 course and an Occupational Level 1 course. So that means if you carry a weapon for your job, in whatever capacity that is as a first responder, you're eligible to attend the Occupational Level 1 course. Go to sheepdogresponse.com, click on courses, find the now open Palm Bay course, and enroll if you are anywhere near Palm Bay, Florida. And much anticipated, coming up in early 2019 in January, the week before SHOT Show, the entire Sheepdog Response team is going to be in Las Vegas, Nevada for a SOTEC Level 1 course, a Sheepdog Level 1 course, an Occupational Level 1 course, and an Occupational Carbine course. And you know what? I'm not going to swear to it, but we just might decide to throw a jiu-jitsu seminar in there too. Who knows? Who knows? We might just do that. We might round it out, make it so that wouldn't be a trifecta. That would be a pentafecta, I guess. I don't know.
That's
I don't know.
Big words.
What would you call that? I don't know.
A lot of training.
Literally a lot. I'd call it awesome. That's what I'd call it. With me in the Sheepdog Response studio today is a man who needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. So he is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He is a black belt in Modern Army Combatives, former All-State wrestler from Oklahoma. And if you don't know, so what football is in Texas, that's what wrestling is in Oklahoma, if you don't know it, okay? It's kind of a big deal. So also former MMA fighter, and what was your professional record?
Well, technically, because the sheriff's office came in and made one of my fights pro, that would make it 5-0.
5-0. 5-0. All right. Kris Perkins, ladies and gentlemen. So you've probably seen his bio on the Sheepdog Response website. Kris is, I guess the best way that I could outline your role, you're kind of like Tom Hayden in The Godfather right now. You're not an active mafioso with Sheepdog Response. You're still kind of a consigliere. We still call on your counsel quite frequently. Although you're not deep in the mix with Sheepdog for a number of reasons, and you got a lot of other things going on. But you look like you have something you want to say before I ask you a question.
I'm listening.
Okay.
I'm just.
Let's talk about. So what I wanted to talk about today is because you've been pretty instrumental for me in my jiu-jitsu, in my martial arts game, and kind of showing me things that I can do because of my size. We're kind of similar in size. And because of my age, we're kind of similar in age too, even though I'm a little bit older than you. So you've kind of helped me adapt jiu-jitsu to a little bit more of a short guy jiu-jitsu and a little bit more of an old guy jiu-jitsu. It's been really helpful for me. And that's a question I get a lot from people is, hey, Doc, I really want to get into this, but I'm 45 or I'm 55 or whatever it is. I've never done anything like this before. And I just don't know if I can do it. So let's talk a little bit about your martial arts journey. So
I started wrestling. I grew up in a family that wrestles. I always tell people my first wrestling tournament was 1974. And I pretty much stayed active of some kind of wrestling or jiu-jitsu or judo or coaching wrestling. And I found that coaching is actually where I excel. I know how that sounds to a lot of people, but I love it. I understand how people's bodies move, understand the motions, and growing up in jiu-jitsu with the influence of combatives dominating what I was doing, and wrestling as my foundation. I've never been a big guard guy. I understand it. I have to be able to teach it. I have to be able to explain it. but it's not where I've ever wanted to be in any kind of grappling match or fight. So I've always had to kind of gravitate towards people that teach the same topside pressure, and that's kind of how me and Tim met. We met at the first All-Army tournament. He had the same philosophy. He was just way better at it than I was. But we just kind of stayed in touch through the combatives world, and it was that same philosophy that stayed, that has kept us, drawn together all the time.
So 1974, when you did your first wrestling tournament, you were how old?
4 years old.
4 years old. Wow.
And I'd been wrestling a year before I could.
Okay. So, wow. Okay. How old were you when you first put a gi on and took your first jiu-jitsu class?
I did for just a short time in Japan. I don't really want to count it because I didn't take it serious. It was just something the wrestling guys did.
Okay.
But
And
I
that
borrowed
was
91.
You were Air Force at the time?
I was Air Force at the time. Yeah.
So for those who don't know it, Kris has been in the Air Force and the Army.
And I went from Air Force to Army.
Not the other way around.
I manned up.
And retired. Yeah, he moved up, moved forward in the battle space, and he ultimately retired from the United States Army. But so you took some, and obviously that was traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu.
Yes,
Yeah.
and then when I was a drill sergeant, this thing called combatives in I think it was 2002 came about. I was incredibly tired of being around hundreds of soldiers, and they came to us and said, "Hey, who wants to take this class? They're going to punch you in the face." And I was like, anything's better than being with Joe. I'll go do it.
All right.
And I loved it.
Yeah.
I met Matt Larson.
Matt Larson, for those that don't know it, the father of modern Army combatives, so Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and obviously the first black belt. So he is the Helio, I guess you would say, of modern Army combatives.
Yeah, he is. He had a stable of just straight studs that were all doing jiu-jitsu way before it was mainstream. So we would go to Fort Benning to these schools and just get our asses kicked because these were all very solid purple belts at the time, brown belts, and we were all just wrestlers starting out, and we're like, how are they beating the crap? And so we would train, but back then we would train with it's like a bunch of guys that liked it. We had nobody to give us any instruction. Someone would go take a seminar, learn a couple moves, bring it back, but really it was just about 9-10 of us just beating the crap out of each other. We're like, I can remember we rented space in a karate dojo that had mats, and they kicked us out because there was so much blood in the bathroom where we were trying to like stop bloody noses and stuff, and we weren't cleaning up well, but we didn't know. We're like, oh, just fight hard, and you'll get better.
Iron sharpening iron.
We would, and one guy would take a fight, and we'd go with him, but everybody'd bring their fight shorts and a mouthpiece and a cup, and they'd be like, hey, who weighs 155? Okay, he does. All right, jump in there. Let's fight. There was no medicals, and it was usually in like a hotel lobby type or convention center type thing.
So you started. So this is actually, if you think about it, you've only been doing jiu-jitsu for 16 years.
Yeah. The only difference is I picked up a couple jobs in the military that were combative. So, my day started at 5 a.m. Doing jiu-jitsu and ended at 8 p.m. And hundreds of students were coming through, a class in the morning, class in the afternoon. So if you start doing that time, an average person goes in, does jiu-jitsu 3-4 times a week, couple hours, they might get 8 hours of training in a week. We were getting 12 hours a day.
Yeah. Wow. It's actually amazing that your body could even hold up to that.
Yeah, and especially how stupid I was when I started doing it. It was like, oh, well, I didn't do that well, so let me just try it harder.
Yeah, it's, it's, when I hear about all of the herniated discs that Hickson has in his back, and you think about that's from pushing yourself, letting yourself get, and knowing Hickson and his mindset just from what I know of people who have trained with him and from seeing documentaries about him. He's the type of guy that would go, all right, for the next week, I'm just going to have people stack me and I'm going to figure out how to get out of that, which is absolutely the worst thing you could possibly do for your back.
And one of the really, I don't know how we made it through it, a bunch of us. Back in that time, if you think about it, we'd bring in students of 40 soldiers. Mm-hmm. And the 40 soldiers that were volunteering were people volunteering, and they were tough, and they were physically fit, but they had zero skill set generally, but they were fit and they would fight hard. So imagine a room full of white belts every week that are.
Every time I've been injured, it's been rolling with a white belt.
And it was always, oh man, these are the combatives instructors. So I want to beat one and make a name for myself. So there was never a role where your opponent wasn't completely spazzing out and going crazy.
Yeah.
And that was years and years. I ran the Fort Sill program, then the Fort Hood program, and it was just crazy.
You know what? And we see that kind of that same pattern a little bit in Sheepdog, probably a little bit more, I think, in the law enforcement, in the occupational courses, that you have guys with some training, a lot of guys who maybe did, in a previous life were a wrestler or something to that effect, guys who care about their fitness for the most part because their job requires it, and guys who totally have a sheepdog, guys and girls who totally have a sheepdog mentality too. So they want to fight, they want to get it out, and those are the ones. I've seen a couple. One that always sticks in my mind is I happen to be kind of weaving my way through the mat when we taught Jeremy Horns, and a guy who dived in and was basically doing a blast double leg on one of our instructors, who ended up unconscious because he got guillotine choked. But if he would have done that same blast double leg on me or on somebody with less experience, that could have ended very badly for the person getting taken down.
Yeah, one of the things too that sheepdog instructors have as a benefit is Tim's bringing hammers to the mats, and we were, when we started in the Army, we were blue belts, at best, and that was being generous to us. So it was like someone with a little bit of skill and someone with no skill, but both people really physically fit and a personality. So the classes are smaller with Sheepdog, and the instructor level is way higher than back in the day. So they are able to, my tip for you would be get behind Tim. Like whoever had to roll with Tim, you roll with them next.
Yeah, that's a good philosophy.
That would be my tip.
That's
for
a
any
good philosophy.
instructor.
They're pretty well worn out. Their cells are very oxygen deprived.
Yeah, he's going to soften them up for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we have all ranges in those classes. But the good thing is the good people understand that it's not me versus my training partner. When you train, it's never you versus that training partner because he's helping you. And if you're always just trying to beat them and you're not trying to get better, your ego is really causing problems with your development.
Yeah.
And you have to get past losing in practice.
Yeah. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to get past, and is the ego aspect of it.
I would tell you, one of the things that will help your gym get over that is if I say it was me and you got in the Jeep afterwards and said, man, did you see me beat so-and-so? And I'm just tell them, like, who fucking cares? Who cares? Dude, you can't be like that. Yeah. So if you stop the guy bragging about winning, it stops the shame of losing.
Yeah.
And
we only ever had in the gym, I train at John's gym now. Formerly known as Johnstown or Georgetown BJJ, now John's Gym of Georgetown. And I train between there and John's Gym of Austin. And at the North Gym, we've only ever really had one guy who was like that, who was the guy who, when everybody was done, when you bowed out and you were putting your stuff away, he'd be like, hey, how'd you like that triangle I got you in? Just one. And so John pulled him aside because of that and some other things and said, "You are no longer welcome in my gym." After giving him a chance and telling him what he was doing wrong. And it wasn't just that, but that was very symptomatic of the problems that the guy had overall with his ego and why he was there.
Yeah. I mean, so with martial arts, what a lot of schools try to work on and some totally miss the mark is there's a moral plane of with your skill. You know, when we first start learning how to fight, we're like, oh, sweet, we know how to fight. And we, especially in the Army, you're like, all right, we're gonna go scrap with my buddies and I'm gonna beat the brakes off of them because I can now. And that's what I was doing when I first started combatives. I was like, okay, I have a high end level of wrestling, some jiu-jitsu. I can beat up most of the soldiers. So I'm just going to beat them up because I can, and it's great. And then slowly you become all the way at the end like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to let you hurt me. I'm not going to hurt you unless I have to. But when you spaz out, I'm going to protect you from yourself, and I'm going to protect myself at the same time. You don't go, oh, okay, I'm just going to crush you all the time. So
that was a conversation that I had with somebody specifically about martial arts training, and they made a comment that I could see their train of thought, see where their logic was, but I didn't necessarily agree with. And the thought was, the statement was, every fight you have in the gym will always be harder than the one you have in the street. And I said, well, that's what we should kind of be preaching. It's kind of the old more blood in training, less, or more sweat in training, less blood in combat. Right? So yes, we should be preaching that. But the truth of the matter is, we're in a building. We know we're both going home. You're actually fighting with somebody who cares so much about you, they want you to get better. They don't hate you. They don't want to hurt you. They want you to be better. They want you to go home to your family that night, and they want you to learn something in the gym that you're going to go home to your family later on down the road if you find yourself in that situation. There's no broken glass. There's not an open vehicle door. There's not the possibility of a weapon in a pocket. So for that reason, I understand philosophically where that person was coming from with that statement, but I don't agree with it.
I don't agree with either. Your fight is never going to be as easy and as nice as in the gym.
Yeah. And that's what does Tim always say in our courses? You are never going to feel better than you do right now. Nobody in here is really trying to kill you. We're all here because we care about you. All right. You're in air conditioning. You can stop at any time. There's water right over there. So, we're making it as realistic as possible, but at the same time, don't get a false sense of security from that.
When I first started teaching combatives, I had an incident after that was downtown. That was a real incident, and it made me change the way I train, because when the incident happened, all those things came into my head. Like, oh my God, there's a curb. Do I want to take this guy down and end up next to that curb? Do I want to? There's cars in the road. Do I want? I don't want him to push me in the road. And all those factors came into mind, because I was trying to lure him into a yard so I could fight him in the grass. Because I knew this mess was going to the ground, and I really didn't want to go to the ground on the curb and stuff. And so that's when we started adding stuff in the schools that I taught. I was like, okay, we're teaching the cops, we're teaching the MPs in the military. We'd put a piece of tape on the mat. On the other side of that tape is the highway.
Right. Don't go there.
If either one of you pushes somebody across that line, you're getting hit by a car doing 75 miles an hour. Because that's the reality of your situation. And are we training that? And so you have to, try to think about those so you don't panic when it happens. In reality, your brain, because you're going to be panicking anyway, and unless you just fight all the time, there's going to be a level of like, oh shit, in your head.
Yeah.
Oh shit, this is really happening. Every time it's happened to me, this guy's really going to fight me. And even though you kind of end up laughing at them in your head because they generally habit trained and you're like, wow, you're really bad at this. But it's something that time and repetition calms that down. But you're going to have that in your head going, because as much as we get ready to go downtown and someone jump us and we're ready and we've trained, it's going to be like, holy shit, this is actually happening.
That first few seconds, you're going to get a flight or fight response that you don't get, in the early days when you first start going to jiu-jitsu, you get it because you're like, wow, this is like real, like full speed stuff.
I'm in a fight.
Yeah. And, with the heart racing and the dry mouth and everything right before it starts. But the more you do it and the more seasoned you become to that, you know what the outcome is going to be. Everybody's getting back in their car sweaty in a couple hours and we're driving home. So you don't have that as much. And and part of it is just because of the repetition. Part of it is because you're just flat out more comfortable in your skill set at that point. But that's all stuff that's going to come back to some extent when you do find yourself in that street fight, because then it's real. Who, not the person who gave you your black belt, because we'll talk about that in a minute, but who would you say taught you most of your jiu-jitsu?
So, man, it came from everywhere.
Yeah.
And when I say that, I mean it. Like, so when I was at Fort Sill, there was no jiu-jitsu gym. We went to Lovato's in Oklahoma City, but it was an hour and 15 minutes. And the time wasn't there. And then he wanted us to train for months before we could roll. And we were like, man, we don't have time for that. Right. So we didn't go up there. So what ended up happening is Fort Sill is a TRADOC-based school. So there's tons of people rotating in and out. And inherently, we'd get, maybe someone in the captain's career course that was a purple belt that was originally from California or something. Man, we'd pick that dude's brain for 3 months, and then we'd drill that stuff. We'd go to seminars. So it was just a hodgepodge of everything, and then always going back and conferring. I conferred with Matt, because I got drawn into the jiu-jitsu realm in the beginning, and I'd be like, I was one step away from eating acai bowls and saying "os" all the time, and Matt was like, "Whoa, hey guy, you're in the Army and you, quit." I know
you guys give me shit because I say it, but I like the way it sounds, so I'm still gonna keep saying it.
So he kind of sat me down and explained some marketing to me, because at that time I didn't understand any of that realm, and he kind of gave me the speech on what I was worth to any Brazilian that was willing to teach me. If I tied in with them, I represented teaching thousands of soldiers,
right?
And I was like, wow, I never thought of myself as a conduit to this world, but that's exactly what I was to them. And I trained, anytime I found someone, and that's kind of, why I was glad to come here, anytime I found someone that wasn't a doing long, lanky moves, that was like I say, we could probably play extras as dwarfs in a Hobbit movie. If we
absolutely, that could be an extra.
Give me a hammer and grow my beard out, and I could be an extra in a dwarf movie. But it was a heavy pressure, instructor, and he fit me. I really listened, and I really paid attention. But I'll say, I'd have kids that were literally brand new, and they'd be like, "Hey, I noticed when I did this choke, this worked better." And we were like, "Holy smokes, man! He's right. Let's do that." And then, but I would have to say that my jiu-jitsu came out of Building 69 in Fort Benning, Georgia.
Really?
Because it was, the Jeremy Brown, Keith Bach, Yako Khalili, all those guys that were going to Jacare's every night. That Building 69 crew was going to Atlanta and training with Jacare, and then they coming back, and we were sharing, and they were sharing that with us. And that's why so I would say that's where my stuff was coming from, because that's where it was coming into Building 69 from, was Jacare, and that's where Matt's black belt came from. So,
right. Okay. So Matt got his black belt through Jacare?
Yeah.
Didn't know that. And who ultimately, when you did get your black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, who ultimately presented you with that?
So Matt Larson belted me. at the same time I got my combatives black belt as my jiu-jitsu black belt. And a lot of people get upset about it, but I hold my combatives black belt in a higher esteem, just because, well, one, I think there's like 12 or 13 of us now.
Well, and at the time that you got yours,
I was
were less than 5.
Yeah, I was number 4.
Yeah.
And it was, and the things that Matt made me do, he was like, okay, you got to have so many pro MMA fights. You have to have some boxing matches. I'm going to need you to hit a 12-mile road march in this amount of time. I'm going to need you to go shoot some pistol competitions. Mm-hmm. I was like, holy, when he first sent me the list, I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to make some of the things on this black belt requirement list. Mm-hmm. But that did cause my training to be correct and not, just fall into one realm of the sport. Mm-hmm. And the training and of the martial art, I should say. So I'm glad he did that. And I got them both at the same time. And then I got her a year after.
Yeah. I want to talk specifically about modern Army combatives, about some of my own observations and get some of your thoughts. And then after that, I want to kind of segue into the real reason that I have you here is to talk about, fighting style, old and short guy fighting style. But let's talk about modern Army combatives a little bit. For me, so I left an ODA. I left an ODA in 2002, and I can remember the late 90s, the early 2000s. We were kind of just starting to re-embrace the idea of unarmed combat being something that was important to train. And I went through basic training in 1984, and I did the old Aikido-based Army hand-to-hand, right? So it looked like a lot of moves that Captain Kirk would do and when he fought the Gorn. And then we started to kind of re-emphasize it. And at the time, it was, lines, the old Don Vito system, which we're not even going to get into a discussion of that. Yeah. But I'm going to say one good thing about that is it got us doing it again. Yeah. It got us grabbing a hold of each other and throwing each other around and smacking each other a little bit and getting used to kind of what that was like. And I know in the Special Forces community, the big impetus for that was close quarter battle, because you might be in a room and you're in the room and maybe a guy who was a combatant a split second before decides he's not a combatant and he throws his weapon down, or a guy who he legitimately is a combatant, but he's not armed, but he decides he wants in it anyway and he's coming after you. And maybe you've been told you want to get some information if anybody lives on this target. How are you going to put your weapon in a location that he can't get to it, and utilizing your own appendages, neutralize that guy? So, for us, it was the committees that were teaching close quarter battle were the first guys to kind of start pushing that forward. And you started seeing things like, putting guys in the red man suit and seeing what it was like to just waylay on people. And there wasn't a whole lot of skill behind it. It was mostly, big, strong guy do big, strong guy things, is how you're going to do it. And guys who had come with some wrestling background, or guys who study, Sifu Brian Edwards was a big guy that a lot of people went to in the Fort Bragg area, who taught a form of Wing Chun Kung Fu that was probably a little bit more realism-based than most Wing Chun places you go. And, of course, Don Vito teaching lines. But for me, that was an important part of the evolution of the military, and it dovetailed right into we went into the War on Terror, getting the warrior mindset back. Because you can't shoot at Joe in training. You can't put him in a real life or death situation, but you can put him on the mat, and two people can beat each other up. And that's in a 5-minute roll, that's kind of a real fight. So you're kind of seeing a little bit of who has it in their gut, who doesn't have it in their gut. This is what it's going to feel like when an arm's going around your neck and you might die.
Well, the lessons learned, and I attribute I attribute me living through a compound ambush from what I learned in Army combatives. Because you learn if you move away. I mean, we can go and take sim rounds. We can take blanks. Hey, near side ambush, got to turn and fight through it. But it's totally different when it's real because it hurts that way. But only through fighting are you going to learn that it hurts worse going away from it. The only way you're going to stop it is to get the clinch. And so,
as Tim always says, turn and face your problems.
Yeah, so turn and face your problems. But that's not how we're wired most, so how do you learn that? Well, you have a friend punch you in the face, and if you don't turn and face that problem, he keeps punching you. Yeah. And it keeps hurting, and so you learn, hey, the way to make this is to go that way hard. So during a compound ambush, there was not a thought process. It was turn and fight, and I saw it happening, and I thought about it a lot later, and I was like, wow, that was a no kidding. Training guys for MMA and being in there, being their sparring partner, and trying to train for myself, learning that I have to move towards that. So that's when I really started putting it on guys in combatives. But in the beginning, we thought it's going to be a weapons malfunction, and then that's why you're going to fight. And
we totally thought it was going to be either a weapons malfunction or as happened to a 5th Group sniper in Kuwait City, you come into a stairwell right as that Iraqi sniper's coming out of the stairwell, and your faces are literally 3 inches apart, and you both have your weapons slung, something weird like that.
But what we have found is that wasn't the case. That's not when the hand. And we started, and still pushing this, like, you're going to go into lots of houses over there. You're not going to shoot, regular Army guys, especially maybe if you're a SIF team or something, but you're not going to go in and just smoke everybody in the house. But you are going to put your hands on people.
Yeah. I never in 5 deployments, I never shot anybody. I did donkey punch one guy, but I never shot anybody.
But that's the thing is we're going to be putting our hands on people way more than what we're going to be shooting people. So we really need to be training this, and people know, like, people can feel it when a person grabs you and they don't have any idea on how to make you move. You might want to, but when that guy grabs you and you're like, holy smokes, I've got to do what this guy says. He's got me. So we started training like that. We started adapting the training, changing training. And that is one thing I'll say for combatives is it's tried to stay with the feedback coming back from downrange. I mean, combatives has its downside. I'm not, totally flustered. There's a lot of people in the Army that don't want to do it, and it's what we were talking about in the beginning. It's the ego thing.
Yeah. Well, and
instructors, and I'm going to say this because they might be listening, and instructors not trying to include the right people. If Sergeant Major or Colonel so-and-so wants to come scrap, they aren't going to be good at it. Let them be good at it.
Right.
Protect them.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are going to, if you you teach a Sergeant Major a little bit and you take care of him for a little while and he actually does learn to fight, then he'll fight with Joe. But first sergeants do not want to be the YouTube video.
No, they don't want to be. They don't want to be that YouTube video. The Marines and pugil sticks where it's a female and he just like lays her out.
Yeah, they don't want to be that guy. So you have to get around that part. You can't ignore it and say, well, we're all soldiers and we should train. Yes, you should, but that's not the reality of the situation. And combatives has its downsides. Guys not wanting to, they want to wear shorts and flip-flops and not go to combat and, make that their job. Well, hey, man, you got to do your...
No, and that's the thing is there are some guys, there are guys that do that.
Yeah, and
there are guys that have go E3 to E6 in the fight house.
And I ran the, like I said, for those who don't know, I ran the Fort Hood program for a long time. They were very successful. They were so successful to the point it might have been my downfall.
Really?
Because, we had Colton Smith winning the Ultimate Fighter.
Yeah.
and we were winning the Army tournament every year. That's what sergeant majors knew we did.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't know that we were pushing through 250 soldiers a week.
Right.
Training. They didn't know that we had a simulated apartment complex that you fought in, that we put guys in the high gear, and the culminating event was go clear the house. You can't shoot this guy, but the guy dukes up and wants so they didn't know that, and so they're like, oh, that's the general's pet project that wins the Army tournament.
Yeah, they think there's a bunch of guys over there running that. It's basically you're running Jackson Winklejohns on an Army installation.
Yeah.
And you're over there all training for fights all the time, and that's not the case.
Yeah.
And I spent it was after you left, of course, but I spent a lot of time at the Fort Hood Fight House. And I know going over there at 6:30 a.m. when there were 80 troops on the floor and the instructors were running them through it. And then, that going on all morning. And then the units breaking for lunch, and they leave, and that's where all the instructors kit up. And okay, now we're doing Pati's coming, and we're doing kickboxing. And then lunch is now we're gonna scarf down a piece of chicken, and then the Joes come back, and now everybody's back in instructor mode again.
I only had one brigade commander pull me in all my time of teaching combatives, and ask. And he said, look, I'm getting different reports, and it just can't be right. You're telling me that your instructors show up at 5 and teach the school before their PT.
Yep.
And then they teach PT.
Yep.
And then they teach a class. And then they have a lunch class. And then the regular class comes back. And then they do open training for people that want to fight until 8 p.m.
Yep.
And I was like, yes, they do. He was
and then what was it? Two nights a week was gi jiu-jitsu at night there.
And I said, and so he was the one that really kind of supported me because he saw, I said, also, we made our hobby our job. Like we can say, warrior ethos and it is, but everybody teaching combatives has wormed their way into a job that is their hobby. And which is not a bad thing because they're enjoying what they're doing. But because of that, you will do it anytime someone asks.
And it's a very important force multiplication tool.
Yeah, yes. And so, but I would be cut and dry with my instructors and say, hey, look, we can preach what we want to preach, but this is really your hobby and you get to get paid for it now. So if someone comes in and says, hey, I want to do this at 5 a.m. on Sunday, your answer is yes. And
I see this as being when in the generation of the Army that I started out in, you had post boxing teams.
Yes, we became the boxing smoker.
But see,
the problem is boxing's MWR.
Yeah, and there's a lot of here's the problem that I always had with say that we'll give the Fort Bragg boxing team as an example. The guys on the Fort Bragg boxing team got up in the morning and they would do road work, and then they would come in and they would do a light sparring session, and then they would basically be off until after lunch, and then they would come in and they would train, and they did train every day. They were SD to go train on the Fort Bragg boxing team, but you know what they weren't doing? None of them were teaching their platoon how to box. None of them were running soldiers through teaching them how to box. They were basically training on the same kind of time. I'm not saying they didn't work hard.
So the big difference is...
But they were training like an Olympic boxing team trains. And each and every one of those guys was holding a slot somewhere in their line and still getting promoted. There were guys that showed up to Fort Bragg who... they were Golden Gloves champion or Silver Mittens champion.
Shane Lee's fought a wrestler in the All-Army tournament that was a sergeant first class that had been a wrestler for, I think, like 14 years.
Yeah, and it never...
And he's fighting a guy that got shot in the chest. Shane's, got shot in the chest in Amaria by a sniper, and he's teaching soldiers how to fight. And, how is this fair?
Well, I can remember Desert Storm. I can remember going into Callahan's gym on Fort Bragg because I was in 20th group with the National Guard. We got mobilized, so we get to Bragg, and Bragg is a ghost town because everybody's been mobilized to go to Desert Storm. Rob Curran and I go into Callahan's gym. Who are the only people in there? The Fort Bragg boxing team, because none of them deployed. Yeah. And Rob, who had been in the, I want to say second of the 325. If Rob's listening, he's gonna hate me. Second of the 325, second of the 04 maybe. There were 3 guys in there that were 11 Bravos, 2 E5s and an E6 that he knew. And he's like, wow, why didn't you go? It's wartime. Why didn't you go back to the line? Oh, we got the such and such whatever coming up.
I get those messages on Facebook all the time. I'm trying to run XYZ combatives program, and Sergeant Major wants me to go to NTC and then deploy. What should I do? Go to NTC and then deploy. I was like,
that's your job.
I was like, that's your job, man. And then come back. I was like,
guess what? Combatives is still going to be there when you come back. Yes, it's important to keep it going, but not at the expense of, you're a soldier. You need to continue to be a soldier, and you need to not lose sight of that. And I didn't think anybody, I mean, Colton, who's a good friend of both of us, you've known him, of course, quite a bit longer. Colton is off doing his job now.
And he asked, like, they wanted him to, they actually were going, he could have very easily stayed just doing, when I call it Kung Fu, because I just, want to say Kung Fu all the time. I was like, he could have stayed a Kung Fu boy forever, but he went and talked to, he gets to get in the big offices, and he says, hey, man, I need this is my career path as an infantryman. I need some platoon sergeant time. I need to deploy again. And he asked for what he. And
he did. He deployed, and when he wasn't doing his job as an infantry platoon sergeant at night, he was putting up the pictures of, hey, I got all the guys in the gym. Some in a gi, some not in a gi, some in a rash guard.
So I'm going to praise. Uniform. I'm going to praise Colton, and I don't think anybody knows this but me and Colton. So Colton got Afghanistan when I was contracting in Afghanistan as a combatives instructor for the Afghan Special Forces and Commando Corps. There were active duty soldiers on the camp where I worked. Mm-hmm. And I was like, it would be awesome to have Colton helping me teach Kung Fu to the Afghans. Colton, you want me to ask the sergeant major and the commander? Because, my program manager used to be the colonel here, and he's got a lot of sway. He's like, no, man, I want to do the right thing. I want to do infantry stuff.
Yeah, because that's the type of guy that he is.
And I was like, awesome.
And that, that's the example.
Yeah, he is the.
And guess what? That's how we continue to have combatives going on 10 years from now, 20 years from now, because of that type of example. You want to have combatives be over. So, if you're a combatives instructor and you're listening, you doing little handshake deals and offering this to this person and that to that person, so you can have another sweet deal in the fight house for a year. You getting the fight house for a year might be the bad taste in somebody's mouth because you avoided NTC, you avoided a deployment that somebody in a position to make a decision 2 years from now says, yeah, we're not going to put money into that anymore.
This is what I tell them. If you make combatives your little fight club, you have an 18-month or less lifespan. Because the Army will not pay for and continue to support your little hobby. If you make it Army training, if it is Army training and your instructors look like they're in the Army, known as wearing their uniform to and from work, anytime they step out of the building, they're in their uniform, they will continue to do that. You will continue to be able to be an Army instructor. You cannot run a fight club.
Yeah, but if you're all coming out of the parking lot wearing Muay Thai shorts with your gallon jug of water and your flip-flops, that sends a different message.
Look at Sheepdog now. if we look, people come to the fighting portion of our course, and you look in there, and Tim's always talking to them because they do the same thing. Those police officers, Tim's like, hey, look, these guys got fight shorts, and they don't wear that to work.
No, that's not what you're going to fight in on the
street.
Tim's
got his 511 pants on. Yeah. He's got the same thing he's going to be wearing on the range later.
Yeah.
It's the same thing he's balling them up wearing.
Yeah.
and if he can get those, gorilla thighs inside a pair of pants and grappling them, then I guess the rest of the mortals can too. And I'd recommend the same with the Army instructors. Make them fight, wear their uniform.
The last thing I want to say about that before we segue into the next part is I was a little bit concerned right about the time I was coming up for retirement a couple of years ago that I saw a little bit of a de-emphasis in the combatives program. And I hope that doesn't happen. I hope people in positions of power realize. But, a lot of weenies go to work at the Pentagon. And there's a weenie in particular that he blocked me on Twitter, so I can't follow him, but people send me screen captures of it. And he's your prototypical staff weenie, probably drinks a lot of soy, never saw a shot fired in anger. And he made this post about how we need to de-emphasize the word warrior because that's not, soldier is a totally different thing. And that's the same bullshit that I heard in the 90s. That's the reason we were unprepared when 9/11. And I'm not talking about as a country, partially as a country, but when we were fortunate in the early phases of both ground wars because we weren't coming out of the 90s. We weren't really prepared. Donald Rumsfeld said, you don't deploy with the army you want, you deploy with the army you have. And unfortunately, that's what we did. And we were fortunate that our losses weren't a lot worse. We were fortunate that the enemy had undervalued our preparedness even more than it was. And we were able to leverage some technology and leverage some other things and some good strategic minds because honestly, we were soft around the middle as a force. And I think a way to avoid that is to cultivate that warrior ethos, cultivate the warrior mindset. And I think you do that by getting on a mat and beating the fuck out of each other. And that's what I think.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you on that. And the combatives, if you're listening, and I would hope that you would support it if you're in a leadership position in the Army. But make it right. Don't let them have a fight club. Mm-mm. Make everybody train. If you're a first sergeant in the Army, I would highly. The last lesson, and I'm stealing this from Matt. Why do we run as a group? Because there's a threat of public humiliation. Nobody wants to fall out of a run. Mm-hmm. So I challenge first sergeants in the Army when you're waiting around for the boss to come out and release everybody. Hey, if you're the second person in a second squad, fall out in front of the company, get on your knees, grapple.
Yeah.
And just let them grapple for 3-4 minutes because everybody's going to want to train a little bit because they're not going to want to be, I always relate this back to the regiment. Why does every Ranger know the creed? Because there's a threat that they could be called in front of the regiment.
The whole battalion, yeah.
and said, recite the creed. And if you don't, welcome to third ID. You're going to go.
Nothing tightens your sphincter muscle up more, and your voice changes when you get up there in front of everybody, and it's like, oh, shit, I'm doing this.
So you can do that with combatives,
Hey, you know what? If everybody's carrying their tourniquet in their right shoulder pocket, everybody should be carrying their mouthpiece in their left shoulder pocket. Because you can get called upon at any time to grapple.
And lo and behold, you'll get that, the female in your company somewhere, and she's been training. And if you know that female exists and she's maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, and you got the big, tough, I can lift a truck guy, but he won't do combatives, let him scrap.
Yeah. And you might be surprised. I know he will be.
Even if she doesn't win and she holds her own, people will realize, hey, you know what? Maybe I need to know just a little bit more.
Definitely. Let's talk about strategy a little bit. So, in a nutshell, what are some of the things as a smaller guy that you think are important? The first thing that comes to mind for me is being aware of space and controlling space. And that's probably true for anybody regardless of size, but I think it's even more important for guys like you and I.
It is. It can be our friend, but take it away. I have like I call them my cardinal rules of grappling. It doesn't matter if you're wrestling, jiu-jitsu, or whatever you're doing. Win on top, stay on top, and try to be on top. Number one, win on top, be heavy, take away space. Win on bottom, create space without pushing with your arms. So and these are all, I always give, when I see it happen, I tell my students, hey, this is one of the cardinal. You don't even have to know any of the moves, but if you know these philosophies, you're going to grapple well. So definitely, if you're the little guy, don't be on bottom, because you can have someone with no experience. That's, people say, oh, size doesn't matter. It does.
It matters.
It matters. It matters. So, you got a 300-pound, really heavy dude just started, and you're a little guy, you're going to have problems. It's not going to be as easy. Even if you're a high-level black belt, but you're going to have to really work with that guy because he's heavy, he's big, he's, our really strong guys, our wrestlers that are like just bullying you around or whatnot. So, as a smaller guy, take advantage of what you do have and don't get put in situations where you're being smaller or is going to work against you. When that person's on top, all that shit's working against you.
Yeah.
So
I rolled with probably a 75-pound Samoan dude, and that was the only thing that in 5 minutes was I just never let myself get on bottom. The one time that I found myself on the back and he was scrambling for side control, I don't think I've ever shrimped that fast in my life, and got back up to my knees and jumped around and took his back, because I knew the moment that weight was on, it was over. It's completely over. And you're right. It would have nothing to do with technique at that point. It's physics, and you don't want it to become physics.
I got to train for a little while. Luckily, when we lived in Colorado Springs with Marcelo Moda. Marcelo's, if he is bigger than me, it's not by much. He is way more fit than me, but he's really, really fit Brazilian. But he's not a big guy, but he is heavy on top. He is so heavy. He is so on top, technically advanced. He's a very high-level black belt. There's black belts, and then there's really, really good black belts. Marcelo's a really good black belt. And it's amazing the amount of weight that he generates on top. And so I really picked up a lot from him because I loved his style. I loved what he was teaching. I loved how he taught, but it matched. He was a smaller dude. He was beating big people. Here's another advantage to being a small guy. It's easier to teach. If me and say Tim went and taught a move and the student was not able to do the move in Tim's teaching, what is their excuse when they get in the car? Well, Tim could do it because he's a monster. Yeah, if I could, bench press a car, I probably could have done it too. But then when a small guy gets out and is able to accomplish the move, well, what's your excuse? I mean, okay, so now it works. So I think it's harder for bigger guys to teach because newer people will say, oh, well, yeah, it works for you because you're big. Well, okay, the small guy, it's working for him, so I should be able to make this work.
So it must work.
Yeah.
Where do you, when you're squaring off with somebody on the feet, and coming from a wrestling background and a jiu-jitsu background, you're not going to fight. And I know this not only from having watched you, but just intuitively, you're not going to fight like Conor McGregor. You're not going to weigh back on your foot and do anything like that. So you're going to rush in. You're going to, because we don't want to be in their red zone. We don't want to be back here where in the arc of their fist. We want to be inside that where we can make. Where do you, as you're going in and closing the space on somebody, and I'm a big fan of the meat. I just put the meat helmet on like this.
Yeah.
For those of you guys can't see me, but basically what I'm doing is I'm just putting my hands up on my head.
Protect the brain.
Yeah, like I'm making a meat helmet with both of my hands. And where do you like to go? Are you just going in? Are you going in right for? I'm looking at your shirt. Are you going right for the A in Salado, right there into the chest?
Yes.
Yeah.
So because I want to get into that Greco fight. I want to get into the underhooks. I want to get into that. If anybody in any fight is going to win if you impose your will on the other person. So if me and you fight and you want to stand up and you want to punch me in the face and I want to take you down and throw you down and crawl on top of you, if you make me stand up and play punch face, I lose. But if I impose my will on you and I take you down, right? So you're trying to impose the will of punch face. I'm trying to impose the will of get on top on the ground. That's how it works. So I try to clinch standing because changing levels over time, it's very hard to change levels in a full fight because knees are very easy to hit you in the face. And they're powerful.
Yeah.
So I try to protect the things that are going to make me, not the things that are just going to hurt, but the things that are going to knock you unconscious. So that's what I try to get fighters to do. Like, hey, let's talk about where you're going to get knocked out. And your meat helmet, protect those things, your chin, your temples, these kind of things that make you go to sleep in the face of the enemy.
Yeah.
Am I going to protect you? Are you going to be Bruce Lee and nothing touches you and, you sit and send text messages with your right hand while you're doing Wing Chun with your left hand and nobody touches you? No. People are going to hit you in a fight. But they're fights they're punches that are discomforting. They're not incapacitating.
Yeah.
So and it's like the old football thing. Don't tackle the guy, imaginary guy behind them. So blast through them. Just continue to push, continue to get your face in their chest, and then start working from there. Yeah. So
I think the hardest thing for a lot of people, for some extent it is to me, is we're safe. I'm safe at this distance. I'm safe once I get all the way in and my forehead's on your chest. But it's what goes on between here and there that's not very comfortable.
Yeah, getting through the
danger.
Getting through the zone.
Yeah.
The striking zone.
You get hit in there.
Yeah, you're going to get hit in there. And this is another one of those things that you learn over time. Slowing down or pausing in there creates space that they're able to generate power in.
Right.
So don't
be there for a short period of time.
I've actually coached people sparring against him. Colton has a very good friend named Willie that I met in Vegas, and he was going to be Tim's sparring partner. And he's a Marine. He's a very tough Marine. And he said, "Hey, Colton says you're some magic coach. What's your advice?" And I said, "Don't run. It hurts worse." And he got really mad at me. But 5 minutes later, he was like, "I don't really remember the last 2 minutes. Did I run?" He goes, "I realized real fast you weren't kidding." He goes, "You weren't being a smart ass." That was actually
that was legit advice.
So it is crossing that, and that's what a lot of things what we teach. Like that big point of teaching, and then as people get more advanced, it's how you set up. It's the setups to make, maybe you are punching and kicking now to set up to cross that zone. But how do you cross that zone without receiving damage? You can watch UFCs now. That's a lot of fights are actually one guy trying to stop a guy from crossing that zone.
Yeah.
So, work on it and when you do it.
Commit. Yeah. It's there is no maybe. It's karate do yes, karate do no. You karate do guess so, and you stall in that area, and that's when you get tagged and get knocked out.
Yeah, and then keep thinking while you're doing it. Don't just close your eyes and be the mad bull that Toro. They just step to the side and punch you in the ear as you run by. So be cognizant, keep your eyes open, and crash effectively.
So best little guy advice: close the distance, get your head into the chest, and underhooks.
Yeah,
boom.
Yeah, underhooks, and and then like my years of wrestling, I could always guarantee one thing about my opponent: he's going to be the same size as me.
Yeah,
right. So a lot of the takedowns I learned in wrestling do not translate because I'm not going to try to pick up a big dude. I'm not going to hit a high crotch on a dude that outweighs me by 60, 70 pounds. But I still don't want to get him to the ground. So the fundamentals of controlling his hips and how I take him down, and that's why Sheepdog in their curriculum that the takedowns they have are because a less than athletic, smaller person can take down an athletic, bigger person with those takedowns.
Right.
And so, but they all are, you got to get past the striking. So you got to do practice. You got to know what's going on there. So you got to practice that part of the game to Can't just stick to one part of the game.
Do you feel, and I have my own preconceived answer, but I want to see if I'm on the same sheet of music, that fighting as a smaller guy meant that you had less to change for fighting as an older guy?
Probably, yes. I would say that. I've never thought about it, but
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, because, there was I couldn't just overcome with brute strength and ignorance all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of big guys can do that. I mean, especially if they're not being honest and not fighting other big guys.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's hard for them to find training partners,
Mm-hmm.
that are their size. So I know when Tim was fighting, that was one of the things, finding toys that Tim didn't break. So finding big enough people to fight. So, yeah, if I was going to tell older people that are our age wanting to still do this, and you should, the biggest one, number one, is warm up.
Mm-hmm.
Warm up. And I'm not saying stretching, because I'm not a fan of that right before we fight, but get your body a light coat of lube on your body.
Mm-hmm.
By that I mean sweat, for all you weirdos that thought it was something else. Get warmed up, have a little bit of sweat, get that body moving, and then be okay with losing. If you're in a training thing and you're pushing 50, and you got a 26-year-old kid that's a purple belt, and all he does when he's not on the mat is watch jiu-jitsu videos, and he's like drilling and drilling and drilling. Guess
We've
what?
got two of those guys in my gym. They're blue belts, but still.
That's going to be a miserable. That's going to be a learning experience, for you. But do you want to be better in a month, and then that's it, and you're hurt? Or do you want to still be getting better in 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
Do you still want to be the guy walking on the mat at 65, 70? Or do you want to be done this year?
Mm-hmm.
So I would caution. And then when you do get injured, I mean, this has been a very hard pill for me to swallow the last year and a half. When you get injured, listen to your doc. But have the right doctor. I luckily have had a really good doc, but man, if that dude said, do not get on the mat, do not get on the mat.
That, what, for me, because I came into this game so late in my life, and I didn't learn it early on, because I still thought I was trying to learn jiu-jitsu the way young men learn jiu-jitsu. And that a lot of times that meant training hurt or training injured.
Yeah.
We're all going to train hurt, training injured, training with a torn MCL, training with this ligament completely ripped in my finger, training with my shoulder giving me a lot of problems, training with my back giving me problems, my neck giving me problems. And I was trying to train injured because exactly what you said. I'm like, if I miss 3 classes, if I miss a week and a half, oh my God, that's, or if I miss 2 weeks, that's half of a month. That means by the end of this month, I've only gone half this month. Oh my God. And you have to think about it on the longevity aspect of it, that, hey, you know what? I'm going to miss 3 weeks of jiu-jitsu, as painful as that is. And I'm going to do some other stuff. I'm going to get on a stationary bike or a rower or whatever it is, so I don't lose all my cardio, because I have to heal, because otherwise a year from now, I might not be doing jiu-jitsu at all.
And that's the conversation I had with my doctor.
Yeah.
Right there was, hey, what if I roll with really good people and they take care of me and nobody tries to hurt my arm? Can I do that? And he says, let me be upfront with you. If you do, what limited use you have of your arm, you're going to have 0.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to have to take your shoulder apart and put a fake one in there.
Yeah.
And he goes, and then there's no recouping. Like, you're done.
That's it.
And so I was like, oh, okay. He said, so no, you can't play this game like that anymore.
Yeah. Another thing that I think is true for the older guys in this, and Tim and I have talked about it on the show, and it's changed, something that was a realization for me that kind of changed my life over the last 6 to 8 months, is I can't do like the younger guys do and only depend on jiu-jitsu for my strength, conditioning, and durability. I have to do other stuff.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
I have a trainer who is working on, and my shoulders are way better than they were before. But I have to do that. When I was depending on jiu-jitsu to stay in shape, and because you get this false sense when you walk out of there, you're like, man, I'm smoked. So that was a good workout. So I'm good. So I got a great workout in today. Yeah, you did. Cardio-wise, yeah, you probably did. But let's talk about how it was limited. You only did 5-minute rounds. So you did whatever it was, 4 or 5-minute rounds, okay? You didn't do anything sustained over a 10 to 15-minute period, okay? So your body's only conditioned for that. And I didn't do anything where I was using this part of my kinetic chain or that part of my kinetic chain or pushing stuff at this. You know, how often in jiu-jitsu are you pushing something directly overhead? Pretty much never, right? So that's a whole set of muscles you're not working. Those muscles all come into play when you do other moves, though.
Yeah.
So having a trainer that understands why you're training and helping you with your strength and durability, whether it's CrossFit, whether it's yoga, whether it's both, I think that as an older person is really important as well.
And for you younger people, you're going to be old.
Yeah.
So
train like an old guy now.
So take care of your body. When my first MRI, my doctor literally said, if I would have given your MRI to residents and told them to guess your age by your shoulder MRI, they would have probably guessed about 80.
Mm-hmm. I think the only thing that I would do, if I could go back in time and start training jiu-jitsu at 20, I would still do all the things that I'm doing now for longevity purposes. You know, make sure that I was training my whole body, not just that. Not being crazy and trying to do everything by strength, concentrating on technique. So all those old guy things I would be doing. The only thing I think I might do differently, if I were younger, if I were 20, I would be more apt to also take some judo on the side.
Yes.
And do a lot more stand-up throw stuff. But I remember about the time that I was contemplating that, I saw a video by Stephen Kesting, and he said, I was never more injured than the year I took judo. And I thought about that, and I'm like, and then I watched some videos of some good judokas, and man, that UK you take a lot of damage.
Yeah, it's kind of like Greco too.
You take a lot. You're taking a lot of damage, and just looking at that, I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna have to be comfortable with. I'm never gonna be able to do any of those highlight reel throws.
Yeah.
You know, I'm gonna, Kesagatame and a couple other, I'll do a scarf throw and some other stuff, but I'm not going to go crazy and do it as much as I'd like to. But if I were younger and I had some more durability, if I had my telomeres and my cells were longer, I would do it.
Yeah, I would recommend. I would have trained striking sooner, for sure. But I had these grand illusions of making the Olympic team. So I thought that was a waste of time. So I would have done that.
Let's talk about striking, and then we're actually right at an hour, so that'll be a good way to wrap up. So I'm 52 years old, and as you know, because I was texting you guys before I bought some new gear, this coming up Monday night, I'm going back to doing Muay Thai again. I'm going to be doing some kickboxing, some striking. What advice can you give me out of the gate as I'm going back into that, things I should and should not be doing?
I think most gyms have come around to this. We used to hit each other in the head a lot. Mm-hmm. We didn't need to do that. I would say work on movement, work on the fundamentals of how your body moves to punch, and correct those, and not. We used to learn by sparring all the time, and then sparring was hard. I don't know how many times I was knocked unconscious training at Fort Benning for my first fight. Mm-hmm. Don't do that. Don't do that. Train, protect yourself. Your chin, your head only has a shelf life. Don't burn it up.
Gotcha. All right. Anything else you'd like to add before we rock out of here?
No, thanks for having me, keeping me in the game, I guess.
Absolutely, man. It's you're an amazing mentor, and I'm glad we could share your knowledge with everybody in our listening audience. Thank you for being here, my brother. Look forward to having you back again in the future. I'm going to close today, since we were talking about martial arts, I'm going to close with a quote from the one and only Bruce Lee. Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. Remember that, everybody. Until next time, be a sheepdog.
You have been listening to the Sheepdog Project. Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Sheepdog Response. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the individual and do not represent any larger entity, public or private.